we're going to start off the show by diving into the comments made from Tua Tagovailoa that aired on Monday night. He had gone on an interview of the Dan Le Batard show, and he was very critical of his former head coach and now current defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings in Brian Flores for his coaching techniques. And obviously, it's a big conversation in modern sports of the coddleization of some of these young stars versus pushing them and getting the most out of them by being their coach as opposed to their friends. So there's a lot of conflicting philosophies that are in the sports world nowadays. Flores growing up not growing up, but at least maturing as a coach on the staff of Bill Belichick, he definitely learned that hard love can be what's most beneficial at times when properly executed. And I think that he carried that a little bit too much into his tenure with Miami. It didn't help that behind the scenes, it sounded like he was pretty adamant that he wanted the Dolphins in 2020 to draft Justin Herbert. Instead, they passed on him, went with Tua Tagovailoa. And at that point, Flores just seems like took it very personal and ended up taking it out on Tua, even though it wasn't his fault that the organization decided to draft him instead of Justin Herbert. So Tua threw out a bunch of, he was mostly speaking in hypotheticals, but he was asked to compare what it was like being coached by Brian Flores versus Mike McDaniel, his current head coach. And basically, he boiled it down to, and he was saying that if I told you that you sucked at what you did every single day and that somebody else deserved this opportunity more than you, then you would probably start to let it affect you as well. And, paraphrasing there, but that was the gist of what Tua was talking about. And he even used the words terrible person, again, in a hypothetical situation when he was talking about if you were the president of the United States and you had a terrible person telling you all of these things every day, you'd start to believe it at some point. And while I don't think that Tua was fully going after the character of Brian Flores, it was very clear what he meant behind it and sort of his underlying feelings on his tenure with Brian Flores. And it was a rocky start. We talked about the numbers yesterday. To under 200 passing yards per game in his first 2 seasons under Flores. Since then, he's over 270 passing yards per game. And last season, he just led the league in passing yards. So obviously, some of that is just the natural progression and development of Tua from year 1 to year 4, but it's a little bit more than that as well, obviously, when you talk about Tua, and he's been vocal about it in the past, that his confidence was at an all-time low coming out of that 2021 season, and since then, Mike McDaniel has been very adamant about trying to empower Tua and get his confidence back up, restore that so that he can make the plays on the field. Because as we know, the mental and physical connection of your body is a massive part of being an athlete. So it's very clear to say that the coaching style of Mike McDaniel is much better than, for Tua specifically, than what Brian Flores was. But Brian Flores, he heard all of the noise that took place. Again, this all coming out Monday night. On Tuesday afternoon, Flores spoke to the media following all of this, and he sounded pretty sincere. And when he addressed the media, he talked about how it hit him hard, it did not hit him in a positive light, and that he is going to try and use it to better himself moving forward from here. I thought that he sounded sincere. Definitely go check it out yourself as well, and let me know what you think in the comments section. But he also added that he is, quote, genuinely happy for the success that Tua is having since Flores' departure from Miami. Now, Flores, the entire ending of his tenure in Miami was very messy. It was a pretty clear situation where you had to keep either Flores or Tua. We talked about this on the show in the past, more times than not. That tiebreaker usually leans with the athlete and the talent over the coach, and that's what ended up playing out in this scenario. The Dolphins were still a good team. It's not like Brian Flores was coaching them into the ground. Like, they had a pretty solid few years when he was there, but at the same time, they just spent the 5th overall pick on Tua, and they were going to try and do everything they could to justify that pick and have it pan out for them. And Mike McDaniel, again, clearly, both schematically from the way of, Flores, his background is defense. So just from the upgrade of Tua having a defensive-minded head coach versus an offensive-minded head coach that can spend more time with him, that has been in a lot of very meaningful quarterback rooms and knows how to draw up plays to best fit Tua, that was a clear upgrade there. And then you talk about the coaching style as well, where, listen, I know a lot of older sports fans probably get sick of the idea of coddling these star players, but that's just kind of the world we are in today. And at the end of the day, these players are making, at a certain point, hundreds of millions of dollars. And yes, that's a lot of money, and you feel like they should just be able to suck things up, but behind the day, you take the money out of it, they are still people, and some people respond to criticism better than others, and that's where I think that Brian Flores, he needs to take that in mind. It's not like he's going to shift his entire coaching philosophy at this point from being a little bit more hard-nosed, a little bit more intense at times. Again, negative reinforcement, I think, can be a beneficial thing for certain athletes, but for Tua, that was clearly not the case. And Flores needs to at least take that into consideration moving forward here, where, yeah, he's still probably at his core going to be a little bit tougher on players, but he needs to do a better job of reading other people as well, and knowing when it is okay to use negativity as a motivation versus when it's not. And, the thing is Brian Flores at this point, people are writing him off. And again, I know it was so messy at the end of the Miami situation. And then I believe there was that whole situation when he was interviewing for other head coaching jobs that he felt like they weren't sincere, and they were just using it to fill out, it's whatever it's called, the Rooney Rule, something along those lines, where NFL franchises are required to interview African Americans for the head coaching position. So I think that, that obviously became very public as well, but Flores is still just 43 years old, and I'm just not really ready to write him off as a coach, because you know what? When he took over as a head coach in Miami initially, I mean, he must have been, I can double check here on the fly, but Flores must have been pretty young at that point to be named the head coach of the Dolphins in 2019. At that point, we're talking handful of years ago, he was probably something like in his late 30s. So no, I'm not going to immediately write off Brian Flores just because of this. It's definitely going to be a very tough look against him, and I guarantee that any coaching interview that he goes in for from this point out, they are going to bring up the way that this all played out with Tua. But this is also something that Brian Flores can learn from. Again, got his first chance at being a head coach at a pretty young age, and from there, it obviously, flamed out a little bit. What are you going to do to improve on that? What lessons are you going to take from it? And Brian Flores, in his response to the media yesterday, sounded like he was very genuinely impacted by the words that were spoken from Tua? Is there maybe still a little bit of bad blood, I suppose? I mean, again, he said that he was genuinely happy for the success Tua is having. I don't think that it was about Tua the person. I think it was more about his frustrations with the Dolphins organization at the time then. But this has all become, of course, very public, a little bit messy as well. But again, that being said, I think Flores is a pretty solid defensive coach. And I think that obviously the league to some degree, I would argue, is trending towards offensive minds. And that's not totally the case. We saw Raheem Morris and we saw Mike McDonald get hired as head coaches this offseason. But it does feel like, at least in the past, decade or so, the more successful coaches have stemmed from the offensive side of the ball. So, all of that to be said, Flores, I thought, did a pretty good job with the Vikings last year. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Vikings can produce defensively this season now that they have some more natural pass rushers, that they won't have to rely on Brian Flores dialing up as many blitzes as they were last year. No team blitzed more on passing downs than the Vikings did last year under Brian Flores' control. And I think that ultimately this is going to be something that Brian Flores is going to wear a little bit, and that is going to be his reputation, but I don't think that it also strikes me as the system that he puts in place is incredibly toxic. That was a toxic situation in Miami. I would like to think that he's matured from there, taking some years here as a defensive coordinator, and I'm definitely not penciling him into getting another head coaching opportunity. He'll have to prove that, especially after all of this noise. But I think that, again, at such a young age, Flores, this could be something that, honestly, in the long run, and especially with this all becoming so public, does benefit him from the way that he approaches coaching, and not just the schemes, because, again, I think that he is capable of doing that. But in terms of, if you are going to be a head coach, leadership is a massively important thing, of course, comes with the job, and Flores is going to need to improve on that front in order for him to get another opportunity. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. This obviously isn't a black or white conversation. There's a lot of gray area involved here, and let me know as well if you think if Brian Flores can ever get another chance, because I do think that he has a lot of time to sort of redeem himself in the NFL world. But we are now going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we are going to be handing out grades to some of the highest drafted defensive rookies from the 2024 class based off of their play in week 2 of the preseason. So we will be diving into all of that, but first we will be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.